In this video, I'd like to talk a little bit more in depth as far as the Layers panel in Adobe Photoshop. What I have here is a project that I've been working on, and I added several additional elements into the project so that you can see the differences here. The first thing I'd like to do, though, is I'm going to go ahead and zoom in, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about the Layers panel itself. Again, the Layers panel allows us to organize individual elements and assets inside of Adobe Photoshop so that you can come in and be able to rearrange and move things from the back, which is the absolute lowest layer, to the front, which is the item closest to the top organized area here. Now, when you're working with layers here, you have some basic forms where you have created layers, such as this paintbrush layer that contains Photoshop elements on it. You can also have a special layer called a text layer where you can see I have the word flowers written. I have a layer that was rasterized in a previous demonstration, but it now looks like a standard Photoshop layer. And then lastly, you have the shape layers. You can see this by the little notation of the small shape in the lower right-hand corner. Each of these layers, you have multiple controls over them. The big controls that you'd want to pay attention to are up on the top here as far as being able to lock down and control your layers. For instance, maybe I really like where the maple tree is. I can click on and activate that layer, and I can choose up here the lock. Now if I come in and try to move anything regarding that tree, you see how all I'm doing is making a selection. I can't actually interact with it here. You can just click on the little lock to turn that off. So I can just double click and it'll turn off that layer for you there. The other thing to draw your attention to is hiding your layer, and that's what the little eye icon is. So if I click on the eye, you see how the maple tree has now disappeared. This is a great option as far as if you are trying to make edits and maybe you don't want to accidentally select something, or you're trying to do multiple designs in a single project for a client where you want to keep all the elements in the same file, and you can turn them on and off so that your client can see different types of layouts. Now, some other things that you can do here is actually rearrange layers. Rearranging the layers is a click and drag method. So for demonstration's sake, what I did here was I typed up the text layer for flowers here. You can see it right here, but you can see that my paintbrush is kind of over top there. It's blocking out the word. I want to actually see the word flowers. I have two options here. I can either click and drag the flower layer to be in front of paintbrush, or I can pick the paintbrush layer, click, hold, and drag it so that it sits behind flowers. To demonstrate, I'm going to click and hold on paintbrush, and you see how I now have kind of a light opaque copy there. And you see when I hover as far as the location there, you see that blue bar I'm getting. So I can actually put this wherever I want in the stack of layers. So if I let go between flowers and the flower graphic, you see now how my flower text has come forward a little bit more. And I could even still come in here and rearrange this so that it looks a little more, graphic-y. So that's another option you can do there. And that's something that folks can often forget about here. Let me give you a for instance here. Let's say on the actual flower layer here, I decide I needed to add some more lines here in my art, but I was accidentally on this flower layer here. Notice how it's highlighted. If I go back to the move tool and try to move, you see what happens there. These two items are no longer separated. They are on the same layer. So when you are moving something on a layer, you're actually moving the entire layer itself. Think of it almost like a movie cell. You draw one element on that cell, but you're moving the entire cell to get the animation or the move effect. So I'm going to go ahead and delete those there and get rid of those. So it's very important to remember to always generate brand new layers when you are thinking of adding a new element or asset into Photoshop. Which brings me to the next point, is creating a new layer. Anytime you want to create a new layer, you can come down to the bottom here, and at this point in our tutorials and lectures, I want you to mainly focus on these last three buttons here. This little plus symbol here means you can create a new layer. So for instance, if I just create new layer, notice how it put the layer 1 right above the flower layer, and I now have a brand new layer to work with here. So for instance, I could double click on the name here and I could call this Smile. And what I'm going to do here now is making sure that's active. You draw a little smiley face and you can position it over other layers if you choose. So let's say now I made that new layer. However, I changed my mind. I have decided, you know what, I don't need that layer at all. That's where the trash can comes in. You can actually delete your layer. Photoshop is going to double check with you. You can tell it yes, and it removes the layer. The final item to draw your attention to regarding the bottom portion of the Layers panel is the folder or group asset. So let's say, for instance, I decide to add a group folder. This isn't a layer you can interact with. It's more of an organizational purpose here. So maybe I call this one flower stuff. So anything relating to flowers, I'm going to go ahead and put in this folder here. So here we can see I have my flower graphic. So if I click and drag again, so I'm click holding and dragging, I don't want to look for the double line like we did previously when I was rearranging layers. I want to actually highlight flower stuff. Notice when I let go, you can notice how the icon or the thumbnail for the layer is now indented. That's a notation that this is actually contained in this folder. So I'll also grab my text, bring that in there. And now you can see what happened here. Because flower stuff is beneath the paintbrush layer, that put your text underneath there. So what I can do now though is I can minimize this, click and drag it, and now it's right above the paintbrush again. I personally do not work in the groups very frequently. I do have students that like them, more from the standpoint of number one, if I choose to change the visibility on the group, you see how it affects all sublayers in that group. Likewise, if I lock the group, it will go through and lock all of those layers for you. The final item to show you as far as working with layers is you can affect an entire layer's opacity. This is something that especially whenever you're working with image collages or things like that, you'll often want to work with. The opacity is actually located right here in the Layers panel. You can see it right at the top here. Opacity means how see-through something is. So for instance, this paintbrush effect here that I have behind flowers, still a little too harsh. Maybe I want to take down the opacity a little bit so that I can read flowers a bit better. I can come in, I can click on the drop down, and you see as I change the opacity, you can begin to see how transparent it becomes. You can use the scrub here. You can also come in and I can actually just put in a numerical value and hit enter. So overall, those are kind of the basics to getting started with working with the Layers panel inside of Photoshop.